Chapter 14. Josephine opened her eyes. Around her, the dusty, murky loft above the chapel. The radio was in front of her, cold and silent. Milo, whoever that was, had instigated their plan. Josephine felt anger and bitter disgust at herself for yielding to a man like Sterling. Her body ached, not just from his weight and the lingering pulse of pleasure, but from the crushing gravity of their situation. Because of what they had done, they had missed the rendezvous of the German resistance. Pressing her back against the cold stone of the chapel's vault, Josephine let out a shudder. She had been there before, as Reed had insisted she had a place to leave. She had forfeited it then and now, it seems, had sabotaged it again. She breathed again as the physicality of Sterling told in her sinews. How could a man be so big? More to the point, did he truly not care that Eggers would be true to his word, and they would be thrust out into a lorry that would take them east, and to death? With caution, she climbed over to the radio, putting her hand onto the dial panel. Why had she done it? It wasn't as if he was even that handsome. A broken bar, she sighed, feeling the warmth of the meant a broken bar. If she had been with Michael, she never would have looked at a man like David Sterling. A broken bar. If she'd still been with Michael, she'd probably be dead. A broken bar. She clutched her stomach with the realization of disgust, her muscles trembling as her mind wandered. A broken bar here, broken bar, and a broken bar. The radio, a fragile thing cobbled together from scavenged parts, sat exactly where they had left it the previous night. The last transmission from Milo of Leipzig haunted her. She sank onto the floor, still feeling the damp, physical evidence of here. A broken bar. Broken night. A broken bar with him congealed in her thighs. A broken bar. But treachery would be known. A broken bar. What was there left to do? A broken bar. She could. A broken bar. Return to her room and get tidied up, for one thing. Josephine slammed her hand onto the cold, damp stone of the chapel loft floor. Mansour. She was behind it all. Josephine knew it. If only that wretched woman had died on that plane. Josephine thought about the code numbers, and at the world outside through the chapel's unglazed windows. Should she even bother trying again? Josephine got unsteadily to her feet, balancing against the wall as she did so. Then, she heard a shuffle. Just the shuffle of a rat in a corner, or a bird in a roost. It was morning, so it was about the time for the dawn chorus to make itself known, delighting some of the prisoners at Colditz, and depressing others. Although, how could anyone be depressed about birds? So a hand clapped her on the shoulder and she was too slow to slip away. Another hand went to her mouth. "I know you'd come back!" exclaimed a voice she knew. In the proto-dawn light, she saw a silhouette she recognized. Josephine managed, looking past her friend and out into the night. Pity, such a pity he was the last face she was going to see. Outside, the first light of a summer dawn began to bleed through the cracks. It couldn't be later than no time. The drop is waiting for you. You remember the route? And then, her acetaldehyde-sensitized brain made her senses listen to the clues, rather than to the effects of Sterling's vigorous handling of her body. "What time is it, Collins?" Josephine demanded, suddenly very aware she was in a torn slip, unbuttoned blouse and skewed skirt. A broken bar. Perhaps it was still early. A broken bar. Perhaps it hadn't even reached 4. A broken bar. A broken bar. And, more to the point, had Milo said a time? It was they who had decided at 4. A broken bar. You can still get away, Collins told her. They are expecting to. The shift from despair to sharp, cold clarity was a physical jolt. Josephine stared at the dial on the makeshift radio, her heart hammering. She hadn't missed the window. There was an early glow promising a fine day. "Just a broken bar. Tell me you want to go and I'll signal," Collins continued, his shadowed face deflated, his voice defeated. Josephine turned to him and took his hands in hers. "I do broken bar and I have to take him," she told Collins. Except having made her give in to her desires, having made her lower her defenses, perhaps he should miss the chance to leave, and come with me, Collins. You can manage the route. A broken bar. Josephine's voice trailed off when she saw him hang his head. "I need to stay here," Charles Collins told her, sadly. They will need me to operate the radio. A broken bar. They will need a broken bar. I need a broken bar. Collins took a step back, looking her up and down. Saunders, Josephine finished. Heartbreakingly one-sided though it was, she recognized her and Michael, the will to not be parted, the need to be near one another, until the Republican Army's bomb separated them forever. If you can operate the wire, I'll get him, Collins told her, holding out a hand. I'll leave the key on the floor, make it look like a struggly broken bar. He took in her disheveled appearance. Neither of them said anything. After a heartbeat, Josephine handed him the key to the solitary cell and, as he moved to the passageway that would go down to the stairs that would head into the German section and to the cell where Sterling was, she knelt to the radio. With trembling fingers, Josephine adjusted the copper wire and tapped out the signal into the air and waited. Josephine closed her eyes, and eventually heard the response. The radio hissed as the speakers buttered a sporadic sequence of dots and dashes. The return signal. Milo was live. The message was brief, cold, and final. Proceed via the well. She had to go, with or without Sterling, with or without Collins if necessary. Her instincts, though noble to wait for him, were also overriding with a will to survive, and Josephine had to ensure there was no possibility that her fate would be that of the French resistance women, injected with experimental medication and burned alive in an oven. Josephine contemplated the apex of the roof. Majors Goldfinch and Best were close to testing it. Sterling's motto came to her mind, and she wondered whether these two embodied who dares, wins more than anyone she knew. For no one deserved to win more than two men determined to use a pulley system to launch an engineless plane over the high escarpments of Colditz Castle. Collins was not coming back. A broken bar. If they were to go, they had to go now. A broken bar. Josephine decided she could wait no longer. She scrambled out of the loft and descended the stone stairs herself, towards the solitary cell. The air in the lower corridor was thick, stagnant with the scent of damp stone and sweat. The door was open, but there was no sign of Charles Collins. On the floor, however, was the key. Josephine looked over to the bed, half expecting Major Sterling to be gone too. Instead, he was asleep under the rough, woolen blanket they had shared when she woke him in the darkness. His imposing frame succumbed to sleep. Josephine's touch on Sterling's arm woke him and he opened his eyes, a slow grin spreading across his face. He didn't move to get up immediately. Instead, he lingered on Josephine's body, noting with satisfaction her gingerly progress around the cell, remembering the fact that he had physically overwhelmed her. "Move," she hissed, her voice cracking with the adrenaline her body was still producing. "It's not four. We have to go, now." "I've signaled a broken bar," the resistance responded. Sterling didn't need to be told twice, though he took his time as if he had been lounging in his London club rather than a prison cell. He rose with a leisure that showed seemingly unconcerned by the time he was taking or that he was still stark naked. Josephine looked at his post-coital state, his body still marked by the sweat and exertion of their encounter. His cock still quite enormous. "Put it away," she hissed, her face burning as she gestured vaguely at his frame. "For the love of God, dress yourself." Sterling did not move for a moment, nor scramble for his trousers. Instead, he looked down at himself and then back at her, a slow, sneering grin. "Like I did last night?" he murmured, his voice thick with mocking satisfaction. "You didn't seem to have any complaints about where I put it then." Josephine strode towards him. "I have no idea what you mean. And if you ever tell anyone what you think happened, I will deny it." She stooped to pick up the key. Sterling peered down her disheveled blouse, satisfied to see her nipples were still hard. Josephine scooped up the key and strode to the door, holding it by its metal handle so as to invite him through. When he didn't move, she thrust the door out even further. "Up the stairs," she commanded, ignoring his smirk, locking the cell door behind them, and then throwing the key through the viewing hatch. It struck the wall by the camp bed, then flopped into the covers. That would delay the guards for a time, Josephine considered. Sterling, however, did not move with the urgency the situation demanded. Instead, he leaned back against the damp wall of the stairwell, his massive frame radiating a smug, post-coital heat. He watched her every movement, his eyes sharp with a dark, triumphant glint. As she turned to lead him out, her legs betrayed her with a slight, involuntary stagger from the friction and force he'd exerted upon her, and Sterling let out a low, dry chuckle that grated against the silence of the corridor. "Stiff, Josephine?" he murmured, his voice dripping with scathing amusement. "Hardly surprising. Most women find it difficult to keep their stride even after a strenuous taking like that. You should be proud you're standing at all." "Don't flatter yourself," she spat, annoyed at his delays, though the flush creeping up her neck told a different story. "It was a lapse in judgment, nothing more." "A lapse that seems to have left its mark," he countered dryly, his gaze raking over her one last time before he finally deigned to follow. "And I thought you just said you'd be denying it?" Josephine scowled. "All right," he conceded, yielding to the dopamine high of impending freedom. "Lead on." 88,888,888. They climbed the stairs back to the chapel loft. Then Josephine showed him the way through to where the Colditz cock still sat, the glider in a more complete state than she remembered it when she had stood with Reed, before refusing the escape run. A broken bar. What a fool. What a bloody fool she had been. They moved across the narrow ledge of the castle's gully, and across to the French Quarter, the lack of light beam staffing being used to their planned advantage. "Can you manage?" Josephine asked, after they had abseiled down the French side of the castle. Sterling gave her another scathing look. "Can you?" He tore past her to the well and dropped to the edge, then paused. The inside of the well was damp and slippery, the broken and worn inner bricks they were to use as handholds coated with ancient moss. Below her, Sterling moved with a silent strength, using his long legs to brace himself until he got to the vertical gap in the side of the well. Josephine fought to keep up, squashing herself into the cramped confines of the passage, forcing the two of them into a proximity that was stifling, and Josephine felt a vulnerability born of giving in to him. They crawled through a lightless, mud-choked passageway that smelled of wet earth and clay. At the far end, a sliver of grey light illuminated the exit, and a waiting figure in a heavy wool coat, likely hidden away in the sparsely stocked dress shop of hers, stood. Mrs. Schneider. Josephine recognized the sharp-eyed owner of the dress shop in the town. "Chanel," Mrs. Schneider whispered, her voice like dry parchment. "Die Patruil Wechseltem Morgingren." The morning looked grey enough, Josephine thought as they scrambled out, finally clear of the stone shadow of the fortress. Josephine collapsed against a serrated rocky outcrop at the base of the cliff, her lungs burning with the cold morning air. "Come on, no time to rest," Sterling told her, his voice back to its usual clipped, commanding tone. He reached out to haul her up, but she ignored his hand. She looked up at the towering walls of the unescapable castle with a grim sense of triumph. She had done it. She had promised Bill Sterling she would get his reckless younger brother out of that place, and got him out. She had. But as she looked at Major David Sterling now, she felt a cold wall of defense go up against her actions and emotions. He was no longer her responsibility. No longer. She could have broken bar. Josephine's mind shifted and sharpened. It became a lethal point of focus. Mansoura. She could finally hunt, and destroy, Eve Mansoura. The woman's kindness to the so-operatives she had betrayed Josephine would repay, on behalf of those men and women whose journeys had ended in the screaming silence and industrial agony of Gagina and Natzweiler. Good luck, she managed, intending to flee the association of Frau Schneider and that man whose life she had promised his brother, that infuriating, annoying, arrogant, intriguing Major. 88,888,888. But the moment had lasted a second too long. Around them, a cacophonic thunder of boots on the crystalline igniotic rock, roars and shouts reflecting off its facets. Only men pushed to the brink of hysteria, on the brink of emotional burnout, made a noise like that. From the concealed tunnel mouth of the well and higher up the cliffside, a deluge of about 20 French officers erupted like a burst dam, their desperate bid for freedom turning into a chaotic stampede that ignored the carefully laid plan and, instead, bowled right past Josephine and Sterling. They were a frantic blur of ragged wool and gasping breaths, their lack of discipline acting as a beacon that tore the morning wide open. Almost instantly, the high, rhythmic wail of the castle sirens began to scream, and the blinding fingers of searchlights swept down from the ramparts, pinning the entire group against the treacherous rocks in a stark, unforgiving white glare. The trap snapped shut with tortuous speed. Go! Josephine pushed Sterling in the direction of Mrs. Spider, the physical representation of Milo of Leipzig, as she watched the chaos, the hillside now swarming with the SS-controlled Feldgendarmerie, their silver gorgets shimmering in the rising sun. Shots began to fire up. Josephine leapt for cover as the field officers leveled their submachine guns with lethal intent as the escaping Frenchmen were herded into a huddle of raised hands and broken spirits. Through the surging crowd of soldiers, the unmistakable, polished figure of Eggers appeared, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun as he stepped toward the two of them. He didn't look angry. Instead, a slow, terrifyingly smug smile spread across his face as his gaze locked onto Josephine's pale, trembling form. "Good work, Miss Joyce," Eggers told her, his voice smooth. He took in Josephine's half-undressed appearance, but passed no comment. "I knew I could count on you to lead us exactly to the breach." He looked across to Sterling, and shook his head. "A prominently caught by your efforts." Eggers put a hand on her shoulder and squeezed, but there was no warmth there. "Come with me, and when you are suitably attired, we will discuss your reward." The words struck Josephine with the force of a physical blow, more devastating than any weapon. All the agony of the climb, the visceral shame of the solitary cell, and the desperate tap of the radio had come to this, a total crushing of her soul. As the guards stepped forward to wrench Sterling's arms behind his back, she saw the look of dawning, murderous realization in his eyes. In his mind, his strenuous taking of her the night before was a trick. Josephine had told him to go. She had. That the stupid man had lingered when he could have won. These were the words that she would convey to Bill Sterling, yet to her, as they ascended with agonizing slowness up through the main gate, the muzzles of the rifles in intimate proximity to the rest of the men, they felt worthless. 888,888,888. They were forced through the center of the inner courtyard, where the morning light had drawn a crowd of hundreds of Allied officers to the windows and balconies. A deafening, rhythmic thunder of a roar filling the courtyard, cheering and whistling that echoed off the ancient stone walls. The men returning under threat, including Josephine and Sterling, were models of defiance who had actually touched the outside world, however briefly. The Frenchmen whistled and clapped, those who did not make it lining the windows. The Marseillaise rose up on a pipe of some sort, voices of all accents thick with compatriotic pride. They were being given heroes' welcome for a catastrophic failure. For Josephine, however, very cheer felt like a blade across her skin. Beside her, Sterling walked stiffly, holding a stony silence, keeping his eyes away from Josephine's. She could feel his change of emotion, from the casual mockery of her loose behavior to one of cold, radiating fury. He walked with his chin high, absorbing the accolades of the men as if they were his birthright, while Josephine felt she had shrunk into Eggers' shadow. No one would believe she hadn't been behind the capture, not after Sterling voiced his opinion. Worse, everything Josephine had done, given up her place, accepting the party invitation, even collaborating with the escape committee would be seen through that facet. There was no coming back from this. 88,888,888. The heavy oak door of the Kommandantur office swung shut, cutting off the cheers of the courtyard and replacing them with a silence so vacuous it made her ears ring. Eggers gestured for the guards to take Sterling to the solitary cell, before turning his full attention to Josephine, looking over disheveled frame appraisingly. He crossed the room with a leisurely stride, his boots clicking rhythmically on the parquet floor, and stopped just inches from her. The smell of his expensive soap and tobacco was a sickening contrast to the salt and musk that still clung to her skin from Sterling. "Sit, Miss Joyce," Eggers said, his voice soft, almost intimate. He pulled a chair out for her, his touch lingering on the wood. "You look exhausted. It is a long way down to the well and back, isn't it? All that a broken bar exertion?" He stalked behind her, leaning down so his breath fanned against her ear, and Josephine fought her will to cover her chest with her hands. "The men in the yard, they think you are of die Jungfrau von Orleans. They believe you almost made it. It's a beautiful story, isn't it? It keeps them hopeful. And while they play at being heroes, you and I know the truth." He reached out, his gloved hand tilting her chin up so she was forced to look at the map of the Reich on his wall. "I am a man of my word. You delivered me the evidence I needed to keep Major Sterling isolated until the end of the war. What then?" He walked as a predator back to her desk. "Shall the Reich give you in return, Mansour, the woman who betrayed all those brave piratical rats?" He smiled thinly. "Of course. She is now of no real use of the Reich. You will have to travel to Berlin for these. Someone you know well will have them. But first, you will spill those secrets that Sterling confided to you as you knew him." Eggers considered her body and narrowed his eyes. "I trust the ravage of your body was worth the price." 88,888,888. The air in the Colditz courtyard was thick with the fallout of the night's failure. As the guards marched Sterling, not towards the solitary cell but to the officers' dorm, the exultatory cheering which had subsided wound up again, and was clapped on the back as he entered, greeted by Reed and Howe, who wanted feedback on the escape route. Later a broken bar they assured him, and was assigned a bunk. Sterling began the character assassination with a cold, calculated precision, twisting every memory of their night together into evidence of her duplicity as the officers orbited the nucleus of the most recent failed escapee. "That a broken bar, bitch!" he exclaimed. As the men listened, she played the part to perfection. "All right," Sterling snarled, his voice carrying to the huddle of allied officers. The radio, the hidden loft, the signal ... was all a stage, a broken bar, a ploy. "She stayed in that cell until the German patrols were perfectly positioned, then led me out just in time to trip the wire for the French." He leaned back, enjoying the tale. "She's Joyce's blood." Of course, the reaction caused a dramatic split through the ranks. Bob Sanders, who had spent months nursing a bruised ego after Josephine had icily rejected his advances, was the first to seize the bait. "I knew it," he spat, pacing the stones. "The way she swans around the broken bar, that arrogance. It's the same sneer her brother uses on the wireless." He became Sterling's loudest echo, gleefully feeding the fire of resentment. But the men who truly knew her, the veterans of the escape committee, refused to bite. Douglas Bader, leaning heavily on his tin legs, let out a sharp, barking laugh of derision. "Sterling, you're talking through your ass. If she wanted to betray us, she wouldn't have waited for a mass breakout. She's risked her neck more times than you've had hot dinners." Beside him, the escape mastermind that was Pat Reed, stepped forward, his eyes narrowed at Sterling. "Keep your tongue, Sterling. Major you may be, but in here, we are all equal. Josephine has been our lifeline. If the French got caught, it's because 20 men moving through a hole is about as subtle as a brass band, not because she sold them out." Collins and Howe too stood their ground beside Reed, their voices vociferous and sharp. "We've seen the work she put in," Howe shouted over the din. "She's no double agent. You're just looking for someone to blame because you're back behind the wire." The argument raged, a war of words between those who saw a traitor and those who saw a scapegoat. But for Sterling, the truth didn't matter as much as the sting of his own pride. He continued to spin his web, ensuring that even if her allies believed her, the legend of her treachery would follow her to Berlin. As the day stretched into the night, and into the morning, as a car left the cobbled courtyard below, and as a resistance member saw two of her comrades shot dead, Lieutenant Collins sat up by his radio, the convoluted escape hatch above his bed and through the false passageway boards that disguised the main route from the dorm to the chapel loft, a convenient bolt run. "Have you been in touch with the Leipzig contact, Collins?" asked Reed, as he followed the lad. Charles Collins nodded, dejectedly. "Cheer up, Pat Reed encouraged. She may well escape them yet. You do not think she is a traitor, then? I do not, Reed declared. She and a broken bar Sterling a broken bar. He spat the Major's name, used the captured messages to work out the transmission frequency. She wouldn't have done that if she were a traitor. Collins looked at the officer of the escape committee. And I don't think he would have slept with her if he believed her to be a traitor either, he added. Then, he looked from the radio to the captain, his hand rising slowly to his mouth in horror. I didn't mean, we all see things, lad, Reed mused. And if that's what you saw, I didn't very well see, Collins replied, but, well, the broken bar after effects a broken bar. And he told Reed that he'd gone to the solitary cell, as Josephine had instructed, and what he had seen. Sterling says, if she was so, if his brother had trained her as she said, Josephine would have escaped by now. That she hung around because she really was a traitor. And what do you believe? Asked Reed, kindly. I believe I know the coordinates were for a village in Musi. I know that the Vosges had a problem with a spy that caused all the villagers to be rounded up, and any mail revealed on the intercepted messages as a Maquis, were shot in front of Thema broken bar. I know a broken bar. Collins' voice trailed off. He placed his hand on the radio receiver. I know, because my brother died too. It was his transmission that got him a bullet in his head and me in here. Broken bar. There were tears in his eyes now. I know, because a woman who matches the description that Josephine once gave to me, stood in front of me in Berlin and condemned me to a fate worse than death. A broken bar. Worse than a death camp? Reed inquired. I would rather be dead than here, Captain. I can't stand it any longer. He got up, suddenly. Reed moved quickly too, and placed his hands around the boy's wrists, lest he threw himself off the chapel roof. Collins turned, his face filled with thunder. My father condemned me, when he found out. Yeah, broken bar. I loved men, Collins went on. He told me to leave. Told me that I was never to have any contact with Freddie. He looked past Reed, then to the floor, and then back to the courtyard. I found Freddie one day. He was serving in a newly formed parachute regiment. Father would have been so pleased. And one day, I found he had been injured, in a range of mountains in France. A broken bar. The Vosges a broken bar. Reed did not have to say it. A drop of 16. He shook his hands as Reed let them go. He landed in a tree, so the woman told me, broke his leg. He screwed up his eyes, the pain of the telling immense. Do you know what they did to those men they captured? She told me. Collins stepped back and away from Reed, folding his arms around his chest, as if anchoring something close to his heart. Reed could guess, but stood still, waiting for Charles Collins to continue. Freddie was made to walk on his broken leg east, to the German border. He was pushed into a room with 30 other men, none of them clean, none of them washed. A broken bar. Wounds festering. And in a broken bar. Then they were weighed. Once their weight was found, they were made to carry bricks to the top of a ladder at speed, shots being fired at them if they were too slow. If they dropped the bricks, they would be beaten and made to start again. At the top of the ladder, they had to drop the bricks, then go back to the bottom and stack them again. The weighing of them meant that the amount they were to carry was correlated with their weight, so it was always too much of a burden. Day after day they did this to the parachutists until they were dead on their feet and of no use. At that point they were killed. Reed guessed, more out of necessity for his own mental health than anything else. I don't know what happened to Freddie, but I do know he died there. That woman told me he was on a list of men who she was collating for the Germans. Other men were on it too. He glanced to the floor of the chapel loft, including Major Sterling. But Major Sterling is here, Reed told him. He cannot be broken bar executed. A broken bar like your brother. Don't you see? Collins implored. I left my ship. I tried to find Freddie. And because I did this, I was caught and I ended up here. Major Sterling had a chance tonight to be free tonight, and he should have taken what Josephine had offered. I believe her when she told me she had been at Natzweiler, and had bargained her freedom with her brother's name, who wouldn't in her position. And then, she gets an opportunity to do good, and Major Sterling, who may have been dead without her, says a broken bar all those things about her when she took the Milo contact and escaped. Reed looked at the young man. There were men in Colditz who were majors, who were captains, who had come from poor backgrounds and worked hard to be NCOs. There were men like Neve who had come from professions. All of them had something in common: the desire to do over the Germans in Colditz and escape from the place. "When you next get a signal, let me know," Reed told Collins. "And when we next run, you will be with us, and you can get home. Then you can plan your revenge on the Nazis who took your brother's life. The war will not go on forever, especially now the Yanks are in it." He clapped the lieutenant on the shoulder. Josephine was a complicated young woman, but I never doubted her heart. I do not believe she betrayed any of us. 88,888,888. William Miller was close to the French-Belgian border now. Sighing with exertion, he hid at the back of a shed belonging to a farm not far from where he had been originally captured, and reflected on his success. Of the 8 of them who slipped away that night, of Reed and Hawley, of Howe, Brown, Hately, Smith and Pugh, he was the only one who he had not heard had been recaptured. Frequent newspaper reports in Germany and the incessant Lord Haw broadcasts denoted specifics to intensify the psychological damage.